When 30 brilliant engineers couldn't fix a $1 million system failure, everyone laughed at the delivery girl who said she could solve it. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. The emergency sirens echoed through the 30-floor Nexus Tech Corporation building as red warning lights flashed across every monitor. In the main server room, 30 of the company's most brilliant engineers stood helplessly watching their screens display the same devastating message. Critical system failure. All operations terminated. Jonathan Sterling paced frantically behind them, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor with each anxious step. As chief technology officer of one of the nation's largest technology firms, he'd never faced a crisis of this magnitude. The company's entire network infrastructure had crashed simultaneously, bringing down everything from customer databases to financial systems. "How long has it been down?" Jonathan demanded, his voice carrying the weight of desperation masked by authority. Dr. Rebecca Walsh, the lead systems engineer, looked up from her workstation with exhausted eyes. 18 hours and counting. We've tried everything. Full system restarts, emergency protocols, backup server activation. Nothing's working. The financial implications were staggering. Every minute of downtime cost Nexus Tech approximately $50,000 in lost revenue, not counting the potential lawsuits from clients whose critical data remained inaccessible. The stock price had already plummeted 15% since news of the outage leaked to the media. Michael Torres, the senior software architect who designed much of the current system, wiped sweat from his forehead as he continued typing commands that yielded no results. The error logs aren't making sense. It's like the entire network is rejecting our authentication protocols, but there's no logical reason why. Could it be a cyber attack? Lisa Park, one of the junior engineers, suggested nervously. David Kim, the network security specialist, shook his head grimly. "I've run every security scan we have. No signs of external intrusion. This appears to be an internal system conflict, but we can't identify the source." Jonathan felt the walls closing in around him. The board of directors had already called 3 emergency meetings, and rumors were circulating that his position was in jeopardy. 20 years of building his reputation in the tech industry could vanish if they couldn't resolve this crisis. "What about the consulting firms?" he asked desperately. "Have we heard back from TechSolve Industries or Digital Rescue Solutions?" Dr. Walsh nodded solemnly. Both companies sent their top specialists. They worked through the night and came to the same conclusion. This is beyond their current capabilities. They recommended a complete system rebuild, which would take months and cost millions. The room fell into a heavy silence. 30 of the industry's most qualified professionals, armed with advanced degrees and decades of experience, had been defeated by their own creation. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. That's when Maya Chen arrived. She appeared in the doorway of the server room, carrying her insulated delivery bag and wearing the standard uniform of QuickDash delivery service. Her presence seemed almost surreal against the backdrop of corporate crisis and technological chaos. "Excuse me," Maya said politely, holding up a receipt tablet. "I have a lunch order for Dr. Rebecca Walsh?" The entire room turned to stare at her. Here was this young delivery driver, probably in her early 20s, standing in the middle of what could be the most expensive technological disaster in the company's history. Dr. Walsh stepped forward, clearly embarrassed. "Oh, I'm sorry. I completely forgot I ordered food. With everything that's happened." "No problem," Maya replied with a genuine smile, handing over the bag. "Sounds like you're having a tough day here." Jonathan's patience, already stretched thin by hours of failure, finally snapped. "Tough day? We're facing a complete system meltdown that 30 engineers can't solve. This could destroy the company." Maya glanced around the room, taking in the multiple screens displaying error messages, the scattered technical manuals, and the defeated expressions of the highly paid professionals surrounding her. "Mind if I ask what kind of system you're running?" she inquired innocently. The question triggered a collective scoff from several engineers. Michael Torres actually laughed out loud. "It's a proprietary network architecture running on advanced cloud infrastructure with integrated security protocols and automated failover systems." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "And when did the problem start?" "What does it matter?" Jonathan snapped, his frustration boiling over. "Unless you have a degree in computer science or systems engineering, I don't think you'd understand the complexity of what we're dealing with here." "Actually," Maya said calmly, I was just curious because I've seen similar symptoms before. The room erupted in laughter. Engineers who had been stressed and defeated moments earlier found themselves united in their amusement at the absurdity of a delivery driver claiming to understand their sophisticated systems. Similar symptoms? Dr. Walsh asked, trying to be polite despite the ridiculous situation. Where exactly would you have encountered enterprise-level network failures? Maya shrugged modestly. Different places. But if you don't mind me asking, did this start after any recent hardware updates or software patches? David Kim stopped laughing and looked at her with sudden interest. How did you know there were recent updates? Because that's usually when these types of cascade failures happen, Maya explained. The symptoms you're describing, simultaneous authentication rejections across multiple systems, it often indicates a timing synchronization conflict between the new components and the existing infrastructure. The laughter died away as the engineers processed what she'd just said. Her terminology was precise, her analysis was logical, and her observation about timing conflicts was something they hadn't fully considered. Jonathan felt his face flush with embarrassment and anger. Look, miss, whatever your name is, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but we have actual professionals working on this problem. Perhaps you should focus on delivering food and leave the technology to people who understand it. Maya's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Of course, I understand. I'll get out of your way. As she turned to leave, Dr. Walsh called out, Wait, you mentioned timing synchronization conflicts. Can you elaborate on that? Maya paused at the doorway. Well, if you're running legacy systems alongside new hardware, sometimes the internal clocks drift out of sync. The newer components operate on nanosecond precision, while older systems might have millisecond tolerances. When they try to communicate, the timing mismatch causes authentication failures that cascade through the entire network. Michael Torres stared at her in disbelief. That's actually a possibility we haven't explored. But how would a delivery driver know about nanosecond timing protocols? Lisa Park whispered to her colleague. Jonathan's pride wouldn't allow him to admit that this young woman might have insights his team had missed. That's an interesting theory, but I'm sure our engineers have already considered all possible technical explanations. Maya nodded respectfully. I'm sure they have. I hope you get everything fixed soon. As she walked away, carrying her empty delivery bag, the server room fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of people beginning to question everything they thought they knew. Dr. Walsh was the first to speak. David, have we actually checked for timing synchronization issues between the legacy authentication servers and the new security modules? David Kim's face went pale as the realization hit him. No. We assumed the compatibility layer would handle any timing discrepancies automatically. Jonathan felt his stomach drop as he watched his team of experts suddenly scramble to investigate something a delivery driver had identified in less than 5 minutes of observation. What none of them knew was that Maya Chen wasn't just a delivery driver, and the revelation of who she really was would shake the foundation of everything they believed about talent, value, and the dangerous assumptions people make based on appearances. The real story was just beginning. Within minutes of Maya's departure, the Nexus Tech server room transformed from a place of hopeless frustration into a hive of frantic activity. Rebecca Walsh pulled up diagnostic interfaces she hadn't accessed in hours, while David Kim dove deep into timing protocol logs that everyone had assumed were functioning correctly. This is impossible, Michael Torres muttered, staring at his screen in disbelief. The timing drift between our legacy authentication servers and the new security modules is off by exactly 847 milliseconds. How did we miss this? Jonathan Sterling stood behind them, watching his team of experts uncover the very issue that a delivery driver had identified within minutes of walking into their crisis. The implications were staggering, and his pride was taking a beating with each passing second. Because we trusted the automated compatibility reports, Doctor, Walsh replied, her voice heavy with the weight of professional embarrassment. The integration software said everything was synchronized, so we never manually verified the timing protocols. Lisa Park, who had been quiet since Maya's departure, spoke up nervously. Should we call her back? The delivery girl, I mean. If she was right about this, maybe she has other insights. Absolutely not, Jonathan snapped, though his conviction was wavering. We're not going to admit that 30 trained engineers needed help from someone who delivers food for a living. But as the team worked to implement timing corrections, they discovered that Maya's observation was just the tip of the iceberg. The timing synchronization issue had exposed a cascade of deeper problems that their expensive consulting firms had completely missed. "Jonathan," David Kim called out, his voice tense with discovery. "You need to see this. The timing conflict didn't just cause authentication failures. It created a recursive loop in our backup systems. Every time we tried to restart, the backups were pulling corrupted timing stamps from the failed authentication attempts." "What does that mean for recovery?" Jonathan asked, though he already suspected the answer would be worse than their current situation. "It means our backup systems have been writing corrupted data for the past 18 hours, Michael Torres replied grimly. "We're not just dealing with a system failure anymore. We're dealing with systematic data corruption across multiple redundant systems." The room fell silent as the full scope of their crisis became clear. What had started as a network outage had evolved into something far more catastrophic. Their backup systems, which were supposed to protect against exactly this type of failure, had instead been making the problem exponentially worse. Dr. Walsh pulled up financial projections on her secondary monitor. "If we have to restore from pre-corruption backups, we're looking at losing nearly 2 days of customer data and transactions. The liability alone could exceed $20 million. Jonathan felt his career flashing before his eyes. $20 million in losses, class action lawsuits from affected customers, and the complete failure of systems that he had personally overseen. The board wouldn't just fire him, they would make him the scapegoat for the entire disaster. That's when his assistant, Patricia Reynolds, appeared in the doorway with an urgent expression. "Mr. Sterling, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see you. She says it's about the system problems. Unless it's another consulting firm with enterprise-level expertise, I don't have time," Jonathan replied without looking away from the screens. "Actually, sir, it's the delivery driver from earlier. She's back, and she's asking to speak with you personally." Every head in the room turned toward Patricia. The idea that Maya had returned, particularly with a specific request to speak with Jonathan, sent a ripple of curiosity through the exhausted team of engineers. Why would she come back? Lisa Park wondered aloud. Maybe she forgot something, Michael Torres suggested, though his tone indicated he didn't believe his own explanation. Jonathan's first instinct was to dismiss Maya entirely, but something nagged at him. Her analysis had been accurate, her terminology had been precise, and her understanding of complex system interactions had been surprisingly sophisticated. "Fine," he said reluctantly. "Send her in, but make it quick." When Maya entered the server room for the second time, she carried herself differently. Gone was the apologetic deference of a service worker trying not to inconvenience important people. Instead, she moved with quiet confidence, her eyes immediately scanning the diagnostic displays that now showed the timing synchronization problems her observation had uncovered. "I see you found the timing drift," she said simply. Dr. Walsh looked up from her workstation. "Yes, and we discovered it's caused much more damage than we initially realized. Our backup systems have been corrupting data for nearly 2 days." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "That's probably why the standard recovery protocols aren't working. The corruption signatures would propagate through any restoration attempts." "How could you possibly know that?" Jonathan demanded, his frustration with the situation spilling over into his tone. Maya met his gaze steadily. "Because I've seen this exact scenario before. The timing drift creates a signature pattern in the corrupted data. If you try to restore using standard protocols, the same timing conflicts that caused the original failure will reproduce themselves during the restoration process. That's exactly what happened when we tried the backup restoration 3 hours ago," David Kim said slowly. "But how could you know our restoration protocols?" "I don't know your specific protocols," Maya replied, "but the mathematical principles underlying timing synchronization are universal. The corruption patterns follow predictable algorithms regardless of the specific hardware or software implementation." Michael Torres saved his work and turned to face Maya directly. "Okay, I'll bite. What's your educational background? Because you're talking about concepts that most computer science graduates don't encounter until advanced coursework." Maya hesitated for a moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. I have some experience with complex systems analysis. Some experience, Jonathan scoffed. Lady, we're dealing with a potential $20 million disaster. Either you have relevant qualifications to help us, or you're wasting everyone's time with lucky guesses. Actually, Maya said quietly, I might be able to help you recover your data without losing the corrupted transactions. The room went completely silent. What Maya was suggesting, recovering corrupted data from a timing synchronization failure, was theoretically possible, but practically beyond the capabilities of most enterprise-level tech support teams. That's impossible, Dr. Walsh said flatly. Once the timing signatures are corrupted, the data integrity is compromised beyond recovery. Not necessarily, Maya replied. If you can isolate the timing signature patterns and create a reverse synchronization algorithm, you can essentially replay the corruption process in reverse, recovering the original data with temporal integrity intact. Lisa Park's mouth fell open. Reverse synchronization algorithms? I've read papers about theoretical applications, but no one has actually implemented them in real-world scenarios. Because most people think it's too complex to be practical, Maya said. But if you understand the underlying mathematical relationships between temporal data structures and synchronization protocols, it's actually quite straightforward. Jonathan felt like he was living in an alternate reality. This young woman, who had walked into their crisis as a food delivery driver, was casually discussing advanced theoretical concepts that his team of experts considered cutting edge. Even if what you're suggesting is theoretically possible, he said carefully, the implementation would require extensive knowledge of our specific system architecture, our database structures, and our proprietary protocols. Maya smiled for the first time since returning to the server room. Would you like me to show you? Before anyone could respond, she was already moving toward an empty workstation. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent countless hours working with complex systems. Wait, Dr. Walsh called out. You can't just access our systems without authorization. There are security protocols, confidentiality agreements. She's right, Jonathan said, though he found himself fascinated by Maya's confidence. We can't let unauthorized personnel access our infrastructure. Maya paused and looked back at them. I understand your concerns about security, but every minute that passes makes the data corruption more difficult to reverse. The longer you wait, the less recoverable your customer data becomes. The weight of her words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. $20 million in potential losses, thousands of affected customers, and the possibility that waiting for proper authorization might make recovery impossible. What exactly would you need to access? David Kim asked, his professional curiosity overriding his caution. Just a sandbox environment with access to your timing logs and a sample of the corrupted data structures, Maya replied. I can demonstrate the reverse synchronization concept without touching your production systems. Jonathan found himself at a crossroads. Every logical part of his mind told him that trusting a delivery driver with their corporate crisis was insane. But the analytical part of his mind recognized that Maya's understanding of their problems was deeper and more sophisticated than anything his team had demonstrated. Dr. Walsh, he said finally, set up an isolated test environment. Let's see what she can do. As Rebecca Walsh began configuring a secure sandbox for Maya to work in, none of them realized they were about to witness something that would fundamentally change their understanding of talent, expertise, and the dangerous assumptions people make about others based on their profession or appearance. Maya Chen was about to reveal exactly who she really was. Doctor. Rebecca Walsh's fingers trembled slightly as she configured the isolated test environment, her years of experience suddenly feeling inadequate compared to the quiet confidence radiating from the young woman beside her. The sandbox system hummed to life, displaying clean diagnostic screens that bore no trace of the catastrophic failures plaguing their production networks. Access granted, Rebecca announced, stepping back from the workstation. You have read-only access to corrupted data samples and full access to timing log analysis tools. Maya approached the terminal with the fluid movements of someone completely at home in technical environments. Her fingers found the keyboard naturally, and within seconds, she was navigating through complex data structures with an ease that made the watching engineers exchange uncomfortable glances. The corruption pattern is even more extensive than I initially thought, Maya murmured, her eyes scanning lines of code that scrolled past faster than most people could read. You're not just dealing with timing drift. There's a cascading authentication loop that's been compounding the problem exponentially. Jonathan Sterling positioned himself where he could see both Maya's screen and her face. Despite his skepticism, he found himself fascinated by her technical fluency. "What exactly are you seeing that we missed?" "Here," Maya said, highlighting a section of corrupted timing data. "Your authentication system is designed to retry failed connections, right? But when the timing drift causes authentication failures, the retry attempts are being logged with corrupted timestamps. Each retry creates a new corrupted entry, which then triggers more authentication failures." Michael Torres leaned in closer, his professional pride warring with his growing realization that Maya was identifying problems their team had completely overlooked. That would explain why the failures accelerated over time instead of remaining constant. "Exactly," Maya confirmed, pulling up a visualization that displayed the exponential growth of corrupted entries. "But here's the critical insight. The corruption follows a predictable mathematical sequence. If we can map the progression pattern, we can essentially reverse engineer the original data." Lisa Park stared at the screen in amazement. That's incredibly sophisticated analysis. Where did you learn to approach data corruption from a mathematical modeling perspective? Maya's hands paused over the keyboard for just a moment. When she resumed typing, her voice carried a different quality. Less apologetic, more authoritative. "I studied advanced systems architecture and data recovery algorithms during my doctorate program." The words hung in the air like a bombshell. Every person in the room processed the implications of what Maya had just revealed, their assumptions about her background crashing down around them. "Doctorate program?" Jonathan repeated slowly. "In what field?" "Computer science with a specialization in large-scale system resilience," Maya replied, without taking her eyes off the screen. "I wrote my dissertation on temporal synchronization failures in distributed networks." Dr. Walsh felt her face flush with embarrassment. "You have a PhD in computer science, and we've been treating you like a delivery driver," Maya finished matter-of-factly. "Which I am. I work for QuickDash 3 days a week to pay my bills while I job hunt." The silence that followed was deafening. 30 engineers with impressive credentials had spent 18 hours failing to solve a problem that someone they'd dismissed as unqualified had identified in minutes. The professional humiliation was overwhelming, but it was nothing compared to the personal shame of their assumptions and condescension. David Kim was the first to find his voice. "Why are you delivering food if you have a PhD in computer science?" Maya's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Because having a degree doesn't guarantee employment, especially when you're competing against candidates with identical qualifications plus years of corporate experience. But your analysis demonstrates expertise that exceeds most senior-level engineers," Michael Torres protested. "How is it possible that you can't find work in tech?" "Because most companies won't look past the employment gap on my resume," Maya explained, her fingers continuing to work on the data recovery algorithm. "I spent 2 years caring for my sick mother after graduation. By the time I started job hunting, every entry-level position required 3 to 5 years of experience, and senior positions required corporate backgrounds I didn't have." Jonathan felt a knot forming in his stomach as he realized the full scope of what was happening. Not only had his team failed to solve a crisis that Maya was systematically dismantling, but the very system that had led to her being dismissed was the same corporate hiring culture he perpetuated every day. "So you're working delivery jobs to survive while searching for tech positions," Lisa Park said quietly. 3 delivery jobs, actually," Maya corrected. "QuickDash, Meal Express, and GrubRun. Between them, I average about 60 hours a week, which almost covers my student loan payments and basic living expenses." The weight of her situation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Here was someone with elite technical training, working multiple service jobs just to stay afloat, while companies like Nexus Tech claimed they couldn't find qualified candidates. "Maya, Doctor," Walsh said softly, "I owe you an apology. We all do. Our behavior today was inexcusable." Maya glanced up from her work. "You reacted based on the information you had. People make assumptions about others all the time. The important thing is whether you're willing to reconsider those assumptions when presented with new evidence." "What you're doing right now," Jonathan said, gesturing toward the screen where Maya was building her reverse synchronization algorithm. This is PhD-level work. This is beyond what most of our senior engineers could accomplish. That's because most senior engineers haven't spent the past year studying every aspect of system failures while trying to prove their worth to potential employers, Maya replied. When you're unemployed in tech, you have a lot of time to dive deep into theoretical problems. As Maya continued working, her algorithm began showing promising results. The corrupted data samples were responding to her reverse synchronization approach, and clean data was emerging from what had seemed like irretrievably damaged information. This is incredible, David Kim breathed, watching the data restoration process unfold. You're actually recovering intact transaction records from completely corrupted datasets. The mathematics are sound, Maya explained. Temporal corruption creates predictable distortion patterns. If you can identify the mathematical relationship between the corruption and the original data, you can reverse the process. Michael Torres shook his head in disbelief. Why isn't this technique widely known? This could revolutionize data recovery across the entire industry. Because most people assume it's impossible without even attempting the mathematical analysis, Maya said. And those who do attempt it usually give up when they encounter the computational complexity required for real-world implementation. Jonathan watched the data recovery progress and felt a profound shift in his understanding of talent, value, and the dangerous blind spots created by corporate hiring practices. Maya, when this crisis is over, I want to offer you a position here at Nexus Tech. Maya's hands paused over the keyboard. What kind of position? Senior Systems Architect, minimum. Possibly lead engineer for our new Advanced Recovery Division. Full benefits, competitive salary, and official recognition for saving our company from a $20 million disaster. That's generous, Maya said carefully. But I need to ask, would you be making this offer if I hadn't demonstrated my capabilities under crisis conditions? The question hit Jonathan like a physical blow. The honest answer was no. Despite her PhD and obvious expertise, Maya's resume would never have made it past their initial screening process. Her employment gap, lack of corporate experience, and current job in food delivery would have eliminated her from consideration before any human ever reviewed her qualifications. Probably not, he admitted quietly. And that's a problem with our system that we need to address. It's a problem with the entire industry, Maya corrected. Talent exists everywhere, but opportunity is distributed based on factors that have nothing to do with actual capability. As her algorithm continued processing the corrupted data, Maya had accomplished something remarkable. Not only was she solving Nexus Tech's immediate crisis, but she was forcing everyone in the room to confront their own biases and the systemic failures that had led to those biases. The recovery process was nearly complete, but the real transformation was just beginning. Maya Chen had shattered every assumption about worth, talent, and the value of human potential, and she wasn't finished yet. The atmosphere in the Nexus Tech server room had transformed completely. What began as a space filled with defeated engineers and desperate executives had become something resembling a masterclass in advanced data recovery. Maya's algorithm hummed through the corrupted systems, extracting clean data with mathematical precision that left everyone watching in stunned silence. Recovery rate is currently at 67% and climbing, Maya announced, monitoring multiple data streams simultaneously. The temporal reconstruction is working better than I anticipated. We should be able to restore nearly all transaction data from the past 48 hours. Dr. Rebecca Walsh pulled up financial projections on her secondary screen, her hands shaking as she processed the implications. Maya, if these numbers are accurate, you've just saved Nexus Tech from potential bankruptcy. We're looking at recovering over $18 million in transaction data that we thought was permanently lost. Jonathan Sterling stood behind Maya's workstation, watching code scroll past that represented the difference between corporate survival and catastrophic failure. The weight of how close they'd come to complete disaster was overwhelming, but it paled in comparison to his growing realization about the systemic failures that had nearly cost them everything. The pattern recognition algorithms you're using, Michael Torres said, studying Maya's work with professional fascination. These are beyond anything I've seen in commercial data recovery software. Did you develop these yourself? During my dissertation research, Maya confirmed, adjusting parameters that optimized the recovery process. I was studying how temporal distortions propagate through distributed networks. The mathematical models I developed for theoretical analysis turned out to have practical applications for data reconstruction. Lisa Park leaned forward, her curiosity overcoming her earlier embarrassment. Why didn't you publish these algorithms? This could revolutionize the entire data recovery industry. Maya's expression grew complicated. I tried. Submitted papers to several major journals and conferences. The response was consistently the same. The theoretical framework was sound, but reviewers questioned whether practical implementation was feasible without massive computational resources. But you're implementing it right now on our standard hardware, David Kim pointed out. Because I've spent the past year optimizing the algorithms during my job search, Maya explained. When you're unemployed, you have plenty of time to perfect theoretical work. I rewrote the computational engine 17 times to reduce processing overhead. The recovery progress indicator reached 75%, and warning alerts that had been flashing red for nearly 2 days finally began switching to green. The sound of successful data restoration filled the room. A symphony of recovered transactions, restored customer records, and salvaged corporate reputation. Maya, Jonathan said quietly, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. How many companies have you applied to since finishing your degree? Maya's fingers continued working across the keyboard, but her voice carried a note of resignation. 237. The number hit the room like a physical blow. 237 rejections for someone who was single-handedly saving their company from financial ruin. How many interviews did you get? Dr. Walsh asked, though she seemed afraid to hear the answer. 43 phone screenings, 12 video interviews, 3 in-person interviews. And the reasons for rejection, Michael Torres pressed. Lack of commercial experience was the most common. Several companies said I was overqualified for entry-level positions, but underexperienced for senior roles. A few were concerned about the employment gap while I cared for my mother. One hiring manager actually told me that food delivery work showed poor career planning and raised questions about my professional judgment. The silence that followed was deafening. Here was someone who had solved their most critical technical crisis in hours, being rejected by an industry that constantly complained about talent shortages. The company that questioned your professional judgment, Jonathan said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Do you remember which one? TechSolve Industries, Maya replied without hesitation. The same consulting firm you brought in yesterday that declared the problem unsolvable. The irony was so profound it was almost unbearable. The company that had rejected Maya for alleged poor judgment had then failed to solve the very problem she was now fixing with elegant efficiency. Recovery at 88%, Maya announced. We're entering the final phase of data reconstruction. Customer transaction integrity should be fully restored within the next 20 minutes. As her algorithm worked its way through the final corrupted datasets, Maya began documenting her process for the Nexus Tech team. Her explanations were clear, thorough, and delivered with the patience of someone accustomed to teaching complex concepts. The key insight, she explained while typing detailed notes, is that corruption patterns contain information about the original data structure. Instead of treating corruption as pure loss, you can analyze it as a form of mathematical transformation that can be reversed if you understand the underlying principles. Lisa Park was frantically taking notes. This approach could be applied to any type of temporal data corruption, couldn't it? Not just authentication failures. Theoretically, yes, Maya confirmed. Financial systems, medical databases, research archives, any dataset that relies on temporal synchronization could benefit from these techniques. David Kim shook his head in amazement. You've essentially created a new field of applied mathematics. This is revolutionary work, which is sitting in my apartment because no one would give me a chance to demonstrate it, Maya said matter-of-factly. The recovery indicator reached 95%, and the last of the critical error messages disappeared from the monitoring screens. Systems that had been dark for 2 days began coming back online, each successful restart representing millions of dollars in recovered value. Maya, Dr. Walsh said, her voice filled with emotion, you've just performed a miracle. Our entire company owes you more than we can ever repay. You can repay me by reconsidering how you evaluate talent, Maya replied. I'm not unique. There are brilliant people working in restaurants, driving for rideshare companies, stocking shelves in retail stores, all because hiring systems prioritize credentials and experience over actual capability. Jonathan felt the weight of Maya's words settling over him like a heavy responsibility. "You're saying we're systematically excluding qualified people from opportunities?" "I'm saying that talent distribution doesn't match opportunity distribution," Maya clarified. "Intelligence, creativity, and problem-solving ability exist across all demographics and employment situations, but access to opportunities is heavily skewed toward people who already have advantages." The final recovery process is completed, and Maya's screen displayed a summary that made everyone in the room hold their breath. 97.3% data recovery, 0 permanent transaction losses, full system integrity restored. "It's done," Maya announced simply. The celebration that should have erupted was muted by the profound implications of what had just occurred. Maya Chen, working part-time delivery jobs to survive, had accomplished what 30 highly paid engineers and multiple consulting firms had declared impossible. "The media needs to know about this," Lisa Park said suddenly. "The tech industry needs to understand what just happened here." "No," Maya said firmly. "This isn't about publicity. This is about recognizing that talent exists everywhere, and our responsibility is to create systems that can identify and nurture it regardless of where it's found." As the Nexus Tech systems hummed back to life around them, everyone in the room understood that they had witnessed more than a technical recovery. They had seen a fundamental challenge to everything they believed about merit, opportunity, and the value of human potential. But Maya's story was far from over. The real test would come when the immediate crisis ended, and the company had to decide whether their gratitude would translate into systemic change. The recovery of Nexus Tech systems should have been cause for celebration, but the server room remained eerily quiet as the implications of what had transpired settled over everyone present. Maya methodically documented her recovery process while the engineering team ran final verification checks, each successful test result serving as another reminder of their collective failure to solve what she had accomplished alone. "All customer databases are fully operational," David Kim announced, his voice lacking the enthusiasm such news should have carried. "Transaction processing has resumed normal speed, and we're showing 0 data loss across all recovered systems." Jonathan Sterling watched the financial projections update in real time as their crisis transformed from potential bankruptcy into complete recovery. The numbers were staggering. Maya had single-handedly prevented losses that would have exceeded their annual profit margins. "Maya," he said, turning from the financial displays, "I want to make you an offer that reflects the true value of what you've accomplished here." Maya looked up from her documentation, her expression carefully neutral. "I appreciate the sentiment, but let's be honest about the situation. Yesterday, my resume wouldn't have made it past your initial screening process. Today, I'm suddenly valuable because you witnessed my capabilities under crisis conditions. But that's exactly why we need to change our hiring practices," Dr. Rebecca Walsh interjected. "What happened here proves that our evaluation methods are fundamentally flawed." "One company changing isn't enough," Maya replied. "This is an industry-wide problem that requires systemic solutions, not individual gestures." Michael Torres pulled up staffing reports on his workstation. "Maya's right. Look at our hiring data from the past year. We rejected candidates with advanced degrees because they didn't have specific corporate experience, while simultaneously complaining about talent shortages." Lisa Park was studying Maya's algorithm documentation with growing amazement. "The mathematical elegance of this approach is extraordinary. Maya, have you considered that your unemployment might not be about your qualifications, but about the industry's inability to recognize revolutionary thinking?" "Revolutionary thinking doesn't pay student loans," Maya said pragmatically. "And recognition after the fact doesn't address the systemic barriers that prevented recognition in the first place." The weight of her words created an uncomfortable silence. Everyone in the room understood that they were complicit in a system that had nearly cost their company millions of dollars by failing to identify and utilize available talent. Jonathan's phone buzzed with an urgent message from the board of directors. The news of their recovery had reached the executive level, and questions were being asked about how the crisis had been resolved. "The board wants a full briefing on our recovery methods," he announced. "They're particularly interested in understanding how we solved a problem that our consulting firms declared unsolvable." "Will you tell them the truth?" Maya asked pointedly. What do you mean? Will you tell them that your recovery was accomplished by someone you would have automatically rejected during normal hiring processes? Will you explain that talent capable of saving the company was working food delivery jobs because your evaluation systems failed to identify it? Jonathan felt the challenge in her question. The easy path would be to present Maya as a consulting expert they had brought in to solve the crisis. The honest path would be to admit that their hiring practices had nearly led to corporate disaster. I'll tell them exactly what happened, he said firmly, including our failure to recognize your qualifications and the systemic problems that led to that failure. Good, Maya said, returning to her documentation. Because this story needs to be understood correctly if it's going to drive real change. Dr. Walsh approached Maya's workstation with a printout of employment statistics. I've been researching industry hiring practices since you mentioned your job search experience. The data is disturbing. Companies consistently report talent shortages while simultaneously rejecting qualified candidates for reasons unrelated to capability. What kind of reasons? Lisa Park asked. Employment gaps, overqualification for entry-level positions, lack of specific corporate experience, unconventional educational backgrounds, current employment in non-tech industries, Dr. Walsh read from her research. Essentially, we're excluding talent based on circumstances rather than capability. Maya nodded grimly. And those circumstances often reflect factors beyond individual control. Economic necessity, family obligations, geographic limitations, or simple bad timing in the job market. David Kim was running statistical analyses on his computer. If we apply traditional hiring filters to Maya's background, our screening algorithms would have automatically rejected her application. The irony is that the very algorithms designed to identify talent would have excluded the person who saved our company. Which raises a fundamental question about how we define qualifications, Michael Torres observed. Maya's PhD and research background should have been more than sufficient, but our system prioritized corporate experience over academic achievement. Because corporate experience is easier to verify and appears to reduce hiring risk, Maya explained, but it also creates a closed loop where opportunities only go to people who already have opportunities. The conversation was interrupted by Patricia Reynolds, who appeared in the doorway with an expression of barely contained excitement. Mr. Sterling, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are reporters outside asking about our system recovery. Word has somehow leaked about the magnitude of the crisis and our unusual solution. Jonathan felt his stomach drop. Media attention was the last thing they needed while trying to process the implications of what had occurred. What exactly do they know? He asked. According to their questions, they know about the system failure, the failed consulting attempts, and something about an unconventional recovery method. They're specifically asking about a delivery driver who solved the problem. Maya closed her laptop and stood up. I should leave before this becomes a circus. The story isn't about me personally. It's about the systemic issues this situation has exposed. Maya, wait, Jonathan called out as she headed toward the door. You can't just disappear after everything that's happened here. I'm not disappearing, she replied. I'm going back to work. I have 3 more deliveries scheduled this afternoon, and I can't afford to lose the income. The stark reality of her statement hit everyone simultaneously. Despite having just saved their company from financial disaster, Maya still needed to return to multiple part-time jobs to meet her basic expenses. That's unacceptable, Dr. Walsh said firmly. Maya, we cannot allow you to return to economic uncertainty after what you've accomplished here. You're not allowing anything, Maya corrected. I'm making decisions based on my actual circumstances, not on potential promises or future possibilities. Lisa Park spoke up suddenly. Maya, what if we could guarantee that your story leads to real change? What if we could use this situation to address the hiring problems you've identified? How? By going public with the complete truth. By admitting our failures and demonstrating how systemic change in hiring practices can benefit everyone. Maya paused at the doorway, considering the proposal. And what would that accomplish? It would force the entire industry to confront the same biases and blind spots that nearly destroyed our company, Jonathan said, understanding Lisa's vision. Your story becomes a catalyst for changing how technology companies identify and evaluate talent, which would help other people in my situation, Maya said slowly. Exactly. Your experience could prevent other qualified individuals from being systematically excluded from opportunities they're capable of handling. Maya turned back to face the group, her expression thoughtful. If we're going to do this, it has to be done correctly. The focus needs to be on systemic change, not individual heroics. And there have to be concrete commitments to implementing different hiring practices. Agreed, Jonathan said immediately. But Maya, you can't drive systemic change while working 3 delivery jobs to survive. Let us solve your immediate situation so you can focus on the larger problems. For the first time since entering their crisis, Maya smiled genuinely. In that case, let's talk about what real change would look like. The morning after Nexus Tech's miraculous recovery, Maya sat in the company's main conference room facing a panel that would have intimidated most people. The entire board of directors, senior executives, and legal counsel. But what should have been a triumphant moment felt heavy with the weight of revelations that extended far beyond technical solutions. Ms. Chen, said Chairman Robert Hartwell, a distinguished man whose stern expression had softened considerably since learning the full details of their crisis. We've reviewed the documentation of your recovery process. What you accomplished was nothing short of extraordinary. Maya nodded politely, but her attention was divided. Through the conference room's glass walls, she could see employees throughout the building gradually returning to normal operations, unaware of how close they'd come to losing their jobs when the company nearly collapsed. However, continued board member Sandra Mitchell, we're deeply troubled by what we've learned about the circumstances that led to your unique employment situation. Jonathan Sterling, who had spent the night preparing for this moment, cleared his throat. Maya, before we discuss your future with Nexus Tech, I think the board needs to understand the full scope of what our hiring practices nearly cost us. He activated the main display screen, showing data that made several board members visibly uncomfortable. These are the financial projections if Maya hadn't been here yesterday. Complete system failure, 23 million in direct losses, potential bankruptcy within 90 days. But she was here, pointed out CFO Thomas Anderson. Delivering food, as it happened. By pure chance, Maya interjected quietly. Dr. Walsh ordered lunch, and I happened to be the driver assigned to her delivery. If she'd ordered from a different restaurant, or if I'd been assigned to a different route, your company would have collapsed. The weight of that realization settled over the room like a suffocating blanket. Their corporate survival had depended on a random food delivery assignment. Maya, Sandra Mitchell said carefully, help us understand something. You mentioned applying to 237 companies. Were any of those applications submitted to Nexus Tech? Maya's expression grew complicated. Actually, yes. I applied for 3 different positions here over the past 8 months. The silence that followed was deafening. Jonathan felt his stomach drop as he realized the implications. What positions? He asked, though he dreaded the answer. Junior systems analyst, data recovery specialist, and senior software engineer. The last application was submitted 6 weeks ago. Dr. Rebecca Walsh, who had been taking notes throughout the meeting, looked up with horror. Maya, I reviewed applications for the data recovery specialist position. I don't remember seeing your resume. Because it was automatically filtered out by your applicant tracking system, Maya explained matter-of-factly. My current employment in food delivery triggered keywords that classified my application as mismatched career trajectory, and it was rejected before human review. Board member James Crawford leaned forward, his face flushed with embarrassment. You're telling us that we automatically rejected the person who saved our company, and did so because she was working the very job that put her in position to save us? That's exactly what I'm telling you, Maya confirmed. The irony was so profound it bordered on the absurd, but nobody was laughing. The same employment situation that had made Maya unemployable in their automated systems had also placed her in their building at the exact moment they needed her expertise most. There's something else, Maya continued, her voice taking on a different quality. While you were dealing with your system failure, I was getting calls from customers whose lives were being affected by the outage. She pulled out her phone and showed them a series of messages. These are from people who use services that depend on your infrastructure. Medical appointment scheduling systems, prescription refill platforms, emergency contact databases. Jonathan felt his heart sink as Maya read from the messages. This one is from a woman whose diabetic son couldn't get his insulin prescription refilled because the pharmacy's system was down. This one is from a man whose elderly mother's medical alert system stopped working. This message, is from a hospital that couldn't access patient records during an emergency. The human cost of their technical failure was suddenly viscerally real. These weren't abstract financial losses. They were real people facing real consequences because of systems that had failed. While your engineers were trying to restore transaction processing, Maya continued, I was delivering food to families who couldn't afford to eat out, but whose regular grocery delivery service was down because it relied on your payment processing systems. Doctor. Walsh wiped tears from her eyes. Maya, why didn't you mention this yesterday? Because yesterday you needed to focus on technical solutions, not emotional consequences. But today, when we're talking about systemic change, the human impact needs to be part of the conversation. Chairman Hartwell cleared his throat. Ms. Chen, you're saying that while our highly paid technical team was failing to solve this crisis, you were simultaneously witnessing its impact on vulnerable populations? And working 3 jobs to avoid becoming part of those vulnerable populations myself, Maya added. The same economic pressures that forced me into delivery work also gave me direct exposure to how system failures affect people who can't afford backup solutions. The conference room fell silent as everyone processed the layers of irony in Maya's situation. She had been excluded from opportunities because of economic circumstances that also provided her with insights her privileged colleagues lacked. Maya, Sandra Mitchell said softly, when you solved our technical crisis, you weren't just saving our company. You were restoring services that real people depended on for their health and safety. That's why I came back to help, Maya explained. Not for professional recognition or financial reward, but because I'd seen firsthand what your system failure was doing to people who had no alternative resources. Lisa Park, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room, spoke up. This completely reframes everything. Maya wasn't just demonstrating technical expertise. She was acting with a level of social responsibility that none of us showed. Because none of us were in contact with the people being affected, Michael Torres added, his voice heavy with realization. Our professional isolation prevented us from understanding the true urgency of the situation. Maya pulled up another set of messages on her phone. These are thank you notes I received today from customers whose services were restored. They don't know who fixed the problem, but they know their lives are back to normal. She read one message aloud. Dear delivery driver, thank you for being so kind yesterday when my prescription couldn't be processed. My daughter's medication came through this morning, and the pharmacy said their system was working again. People like you make difficult days bearable. Several board members were visibly emotional as Maya shared more messages from people whose lives had been disrupted by the crisis and restored by her solution. Ms. Chen, Chairman Hartwell said, his voice thick with emotion, you've taught us something profound about the relationship between technical expertise and social responsibility. Your unique position, excluded from our industry but embedded in the community we serve, gave you perspectives that our entire professional staff lacked. Which brings us to the question of what happens next, Jonathan said. Maya, we want to offer you a position that reflects both your technical capabilities and your understanding of how technology affects real people's lives. What kind of position? Maya asked. Chief Technology Officer for Community Impact, Sandra Mitchell announced. A newly created role that would involve overseeing not just our technical systems, but ensuring that our technology serves the broader community responsibly. Maya considered the offer carefully. And what would that mean for your hiring practices? For other people in situations similar to mine? Complete overhaul, Chairman Hartwell promised. We're implementing new evaluation processes that prioritize capability over credentials, and we're creating pathways for non-traditional candidates to demonstrate their qualifications. More importantly, Dr. Walsh added, we're requiring all technical staff to spend time in community-facing roles so they understand how our systems affect real people's lives. Maya smiled for the first time since the meeting began. In that case, I accept, but I have one condition. Name it, Jonathan said immediately. I want to keep working 1 delivery shift per week. Not because I need the money, but because it keeps me connected to the community we're supposed to be serving. The agreement was unanimous, and as Maya signed her new employment contract, everyone in the room understood that they had witnessed something transformational. Not just the salvation of their company, but a fundamental reimagining of how technology companies could relate to the communities they served. Maya Chen had solved more than a system failure. She had solved a failure of human understanding that had nearly destroyed them all. 6 months later, Maya stood before a packed auditorium at the National Technology Conference. But this time, she wasn't delivering food. She was delivering something far more valuable, a message that would reshape how an entire industry thought about talent and opportunity. When I walked into Nexus Tech that day, Maya began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just doing my job, delivering lunch to someone who had ordered food during one of the worst days of her career. In the front row sat the entire Nexus Tech leadership team, including Jonathan Sterling, whose transformation from dismissive executive to advocate for hiring reform had become legendary in corporate circles. Beside him, Dr. Rebecca Walsh wiped away tears as Maya continued her keynote address. But what happened that day exposed something broken in how we evaluate human potential. 30 brilliant engineers couldn't solve a problem that someone they automatically dismissed as unqualified fixed in hours. The question isn't how I knew what to do. The question is why a system designed to identify talent had failed so completely. The audience, filled with CTOs, hiring managers, and executives from hundreds of companies, listened with rapt attention as Maya shared data that had transformed Nexus Tech's approach to recruitment. Since implementing bias-blind hiring practices, Nexus Tech has discovered extraordinary talent in unexpected places. Former retail workers who became cybersecurity experts, unemployed teachers who revolutionized user interface design, immigration lawyers who created breakthrough AI algorithms. Talent was always there. We just weren't looking for it correctly. Maya clicked to her next slide, showing employment statistics that made several audience members gasp. Companies using traditional hiring filters reject 63% of qualified candidates based on factors unrelated to capability. We're not facing a talent shortage. We're facing a recognition shortage. In the back of the auditorium, Maya spotted a young woman in a food service uniform who had slipped in to listen during her break. Maya smiled and continued, knowing her words were reaching exactly the audience that needed to hear them most. The Maya Chen Fellowship Program has now placed over 200 non-traditional candidates in technology roles across the industry. These aren't charity cases or diversity initiatives. They're highly qualified professionals who were systematically excluded by conventional evaluation methods. Jonathan Sterling stood to address the audience during the Q&A session. Before Maya, our company measured success by the prestige of our hires' previous employers and the selectivity of their universities. We learned that the best predictor of future performance isn't where someone has been. It's how they think and solve problems. But the most important change isn't professional, Maya added, advancing to her final slide. It's personal. Every week, I still work one delivery shift. Not because I need to financially, but because it keeps me connected to the community our technology is supposed to serve. She clicked to a photo showing her in delivery uniform, standing beside a mobile tech support unit that Nexus Tech had deployed to underserved neighborhoods. Real innovation happens when technical expertise meets community understanding. When you're isolated in corporate environments, you lose sight of how your decisions affect real people's lives. My delivery route takes me to households where internet outages mean children can't attend virtual school, where payment system failures mean families can't buy groceries, where technology gaps determine who has access to opportunity. The audience erupted in sustained applause as Maya shared her final message. Talent exists everywhere. Intelligence doesn't discriminate based on job titles or educational pedigree, but opportunity does. As leaders in technology, we have the power to change that. After her presentation, Maya was approached by dozens of executives committed to reforming their hiring practices. But the encounter that moved her most was with the young woman in the food service uniform. Ms. Chen, the woman said nervously, I'm Isabella Rodriguez. I clean offices at night and study computer programming during the day. I've applied to 67 companies and been rejected by all of them. Maya handed Isabella her business card. Email me your resume tonight. Nexus Tech's next hiring cohort starts in 2 weeks, and we evaluate candidates based on their problem-solving abilities, not their current job titles. Isabella's eyes filled with tears. You really think someone like me could work in technology? Isabella, someone like you is exactly who belongs in technology. You understand both the technical challenges and the human needs that technology should address. That combination is invaluable. As Maya watched Isabella walk away with renewed hope, she reflected on how a single moment of crisis had revealed so many opportunities for positive change. The system failure that nearly destroyed Nexus Tech had instead become the catalyst for transforming how an entire industry identified and nurtured talent. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her former delivery supervisor. "Saw your speech online. Proud of you for never forgetting where you came from." She smiled and typed back, "How could I forget? It's where I learned that the most important problems to solve are the ones affecting people who can't afford backup solutions." That evening, as Maya returned to her apartment, no longer the cramped studio she'd occupied during her unemployment, but still in the same neighborhood where she delivered food, she reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her here. The delivery bag that had once represented economic necessity now sat in her closet as a reminder of how quickly circumstances could change, and how important it was to remain connected to the experiences that shaped her perspective on technology's role in society. Maya Chen had started as someone the system overlooked and dismissed. She had become someone who transformed the system itself, proving that the most powerful innovations often come from the most unexpected sources. The real revolution wasn't technical, it was human, and it was just beginning.